The gunshot echoed through the dusty plains of Willow Creek, Montana Territory, 1878, as Rebecca Nichols watched her father collapse to the dirt floor of their cabin. The banker's men had finally come to collect, and Vernon Nichols had chosen a bullet over surrendering his only daughter to settle his debts. But his sacrifice had been in vain. As Rebecca cradled her father's lifeless body, the cold-eyed debt collector informed her that the agreement remained binding her father's signature on that cursed contract, had sealed her fate long before his final desperate act. "Your pa owed Mr. Garfield $4,000, the taller of the two collectors explained, his voice devoid of sympathy as he tipped his hat back. "You're coming with us tomorrow at dawn. The arrangement's been made." Rebecca's tears fell onto her father's still warm cheek. At 22, she had spent her life on this struggling homestead, watching her father sink deeper into debt and despair after her mother's passing. The drought had destroyed their crops 3 years running, and the gambling had done the rest. "I won't go," she whispered, though she knew resistance was futile. 2 men against 1 woman, miles from the nearest neighbor. The odds weren't in her favor. "That ain't your choice to make, Miss Nichols," the second man said, striking a match against his boot to light a cigarette. "Your pa made it for you when he borrowed money he couldn't repay. Be ready at first light, and don't try running. There's nowhere to hide in these parts." After they departed, leaving her alone with her dead father, Rebecca prepared his body as best she could. She spent the night digging his grave by lantern light, her hands blistering on the shovel handle. By dawn, she had buried the only family she had ever known and packed her meager belongings into a small cloth bag. When the men returned, she was waiting on the porch, her eyes red but dry, her spine straight as a fence post. The journey to Willow Creek took nearly 6 hours by wagon. Rebecca sat in silence, watching the landscape of her childhood disappear behind her. The town appeared on the horizon like a mirage, dusty buildings lining a wide main street, horses hitched to posts, the sounds of a piano drifting from the saloon despite the early hour. They stopped in front of a grand building with a sign reading Garfield and Sons Bank. The taller man, who had introduced himself as Mercer, helped her down from the wagon with unexpected gentleness. "Mr. Garfield will explain the arrangements," he said, guiding her inside the bank's imposing doors. Augustus Garfield was not what Rebecca expected. Rather than the monster she had imagined, she found a slight, balding man with spectacles perched on his nose and ink-stained fingers. He greeted her with a brisk nod, as if she were a customer rather than human collateral. "Miss Nichols, your father's debt has been purchased," he announced without preamble. "The new holder has agreed to take you as payment, as per the original agreement your father signed." Rebecca's voice felt trapped in her throat. "Purchased? By whom?" "A cattle rancher named Isaac Fairfield," Garfield replied, shuffling papers on his desk. "He's paid the debt in full. You'll be going with him today." The name meant nothing to Rebecca. She had never heard of Isaac Fairfield, had no idea what kind of man had bought her father's debt and effectively her life. "What exactly am I expected to do for this?" "Rancher," she asked, though she feared she already knew the answer. Garfield cleared his throat. "That's between you and Mr. Fairfield, though I understand he's in need of someone to keep house at his ranch. Your father's contract simply states that you are to work off the debt through service for a period of 5 years. 5 years. The words landed like stones in Rebecca's stomach. 5 years of servitude to a stranger. The bank's door opened, bringing with it a shaft of bright sunlight and the silhouette of a tall man. He stepped into the room, and Rebecca turned to face her new owner. Isaac Fairfield removed his hat as he entered, revealing thick chestnut hair streaked with hints of gold from the sun. His face was tanned and weathered, with a strong jaw covered in a neatly trimmed beard. But it was his eyes that caught Rebecca's attention, clear blue, like the sky after a storm, and regarding her not with possession or hunger, but with something that looked surprisingly like concern. "Miss Nichols," he said, his voice deep but gentle. I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. Rebecca stared at him, trying to take his measure. He was younger than she expected, perhaps 30, and dressed simply but well in a blue shirt, dark vest, and riding pants. No fancy Eastern clothes or banker's suit. His hands, she noticed, were calloused, the hands of a man who worked his own land. "Mr. Fairfield," she acknowledged stiffly. "I understand I'm to work for you now." Something flickered across his face, discomfort, perhaps, or regret. "We'll discuss the arrangements on the way to the ranch," he said. "Do you have your things?" Rebecca gestured to her small bag. Fairfield frowned slightly, as if disappointed by the meager evidence of her life. "Is that all?" he asked. "That's all I have," she replied, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "My father was just buried yesterday." Fairfield's expression softened. "I'm sorry for your loss, Miss Nichols. Truly?" Garfield cleared his throat impatiently. "The paperwork is complete, Fairfield." "She's all yours now." Rebecca flinched at the phrasing, and she saw Fairfield's jaw tighten in response. "Miss Nichols is her own person," he corrected firmly. "I've merely settled a debt." He turned to Rebecca, gesturing toward the door. "My wagon is outside. We should start for the ranch before midday, if that's all right with you." The pretense of choice almost made Rebecca laugh, as if she had any say in the matter. Still, she nodded and followed him out of the bank into the bright Montana sunshine. Fairfield's wagon was well maintained, with a canvas cover to provide shade. He helped her up to the seat with formal politeness, then secured her bag in the back before climbing up beside her. With a click of his tongue, he set the horses in motion, guiding them down the main street and toward the road leading out of town. They traveled in silence for nearly an hour, dust billowing behind them as the horses maintained a steady pace. Rebecca sat rigidly beside him, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on the horizon ahead. Finally, Fairfield spoke. "My ranch is about 15 miles northeast of town. It's called Evergreen, though that's a bit optimistic for this part of the country." A faint smile touched his lips. "I run about 500 head of cattle and employ 6 hands. There's a cook, Manuel. He's from Mexico, makes the best beans you'll ever taste." Rebecca said nothing, and Fairfield sighed. "Miss Nichols, I know this situation isn't what you would have chosen. I want you to understand something. When I bought your father's debt, it was to prevent worse alternatives. Garfield was going to sell the contract to Roland Wells." At the mention of Wells's name, Rebecca's blood ran cold. Everyone in the territory knew of Roland Wells and his entertainment establishments in the mining towns. Young women who disappeared into his establishments rarely emerged, and never unscathed. "Why would you do that?" she asked, finally looking at him directly. "Why pay another man's debt for a stranger?" Fairfield kept his eyes on the road. "I knew your father, Miss Nichols. Not well, but we'd crossed paths. Last time I saw him, he was drinking heavily at the Silverado, talking wildly about how he'd sold his daughter's future to cover his debts. I thought he was just rambling until I heard Garfield talking about collecting on the Nichols contract yesterday." He paused, his hands tightening on the reins. "When I learned Wells was planning to buy it, I made Garfield a better offer. I couldn't let that happen to Vernon's daughter." Rebecca absorbed this information, unsure whether to feel grateful or suspicious. "So what exactly do you expect from me, Mr. Fairfield?" He glanced at her, then back at the road. "My housekeeper left last month to care for her ailing mother in St. Louis. The house needs tending, cooking, cleaning, that sort of thing. Nothing more than that." "Nothing more," Rebecca repeated skeptically. Fairfield's face reddened slightly. "Miss Nichols, whatever you may think of me, I am not the kind of man who would. I have no dishonorable intentions. You'll have your own room with a lock on the door. If at any point you feel unsafe, you can leave. I won't stop you." Rebecca studied his profile, trying to detect any sign of deception. "The contract says 5 years. "The contract says what Garfield wrote," Fairfield responded. "But I'm telling you now, I won't hold you against your will. Work until you feel the debt is paid, or until you find a better situation. I'll even help you find other employment if that's what you want." It seemed too good to be true, and in Rebecca's experience, such offers usually were. But something in Fairfield's straightforward manner made her want to believe him. "Why would you spend $4,000 and ask so little in return?" she pressed. Fairfield was quiet for so long that Rebecca thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "Not every action needs to balance on a ledger, Miss Nichols. Sometimes people just do what's right because it's right." The simplicity of his answer caught her off guard. In a world where her own father had traded her future for gambling money, the idea of pure altruism seemed fantastical. "I hope you're as honorable as you claim, Mr. Fairfield," she said softly. "Because I have nowhere else to go." "I understand," he replied. "And I hope in time you'll see that my word is good." They fell back into silence as the wagon rolled on, the landscape gradually changing from flat plains to gently rolling hills dotted with pine trees. By mid-afternoon, they crested a rise, and Rebecca caught her first glimpse of Evergreen Ranch. The main house was larger than she expected, a two-story structure built of solid timber, with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Several outbuildings clustered nearby, including a barn, a bunkhouse, and what appeared to be a cookhouse. In the distance, she could see cattle grazing in fenced pastures, and beyond them, the silhouette of mountains against the sky. "It's beautiful," Rebecca said before she could stop herself. Fairfield smiled, genuine pleasure warming his features. "Thank you. I've been building it for 7 years now. Started with nothing but a tent and 20 head of cattle." As they approached, a man emerged from the barn, waving in greeting. Fairfield returned the wave, then guided the wagon to a stop in front of the main house. "That's Charlie, my foreman," he explained as he set the brake. "He runs things when I'm away." Fairfield jumped down from the wagon and came around to help Rebecca descend. As her feet touched the ground, the front door of the house opened, and an older woman stepped onto the porch. She was short and round, with silver-streaked black hair pulled back in a bun, and she wore a simple dress with an apron tied around her ample waist. "This is Mrs. Alvarez," Fairfield said, "Manuel's wife. She helps with the house on occasion, though she's mostly occupied with their grandchildren in town." "Welcome to Evergreen, Miss," Mrs. Alvarez called, her accent thick but her smile warm. Fairfield retrieved Rebecca's bag from the wagon. "Mrs. Alvarez will show you to your room. You must be tired after everything. Take some time to rest. We can talk more at supper." Rebecca nodded, suddenly aware of the bone-deep exhaustion that had been building since her father's death. The events of the past 2 days crashed over her like a wave, and it was all she could do to remain standing. Mrs. Alvarez seemed to sense her fatigue. She came down the steps and took Rebecca's arm gently. "Come, Nina, you look dead on your feet." As the older woman led her into the house, Rebecca glanced back over her shoulder. Fairfield stood watching them, his expression unreadable, his hat held respectfully in his hands. Their eyes met briefly before she turned away, allowing Mrs. Alvarez to guide her into what would be her home or her prison for the foreseeable future. The interior of the house surprised Rebecca. She had expected a bachelor's Spartan quarters, but instead found a well-furnished, comfortable home. The front room held a stone fireplace with a bearskin rug laid before it, several upholstered chairs and bookshelves filled with volumes. Landscape paintings adorned the walls, and a large window overlooked the ranch yard. "Mr. Fairfield has good taste, no?" Mrs. Alvarez commented, noting Rebecca's surprise. "His mother sent much of the furniture from Boston when he built the house." "He's from Boston?" Rebecca asked, trying to reconcile the Eastern furnishings with the very Western man she'd met. "Originally, yes, came west after the war." Mrs. Alvarez led her up a staircase to the second floor. "His room is at the end of the hall. Yours is here." She opened a door to reveal a pleasant bedroom with a 4-poster bed, a dresser with a mirror, a washstand, and a rocking chair near the window. The walls were papered in a subtle floral pattern, and lace curtains filtered the afternoon light. "This was to be his sister's room when she visited," Mrs. Alvarez explained, but she never came west. Too afraid of Indians, she said. The older woman shook her head disapprovingly. As if we are all savages. Rebecca set her bag on the bed, running her fingers over the quilt. It's lovely, she admitted. Then her eye caught something on the door, a heavy brass key in the lock. Fairfield had been telling the truth about that, at least. There is water in the pitcher for washing, Mrs. Alvarez said. I will bring fresh tomorrow. Supper is at 6. Kitchen is behind the stairs. After the woman left, Rebecca sank onto the bed, overwhelmed. Everything had happened so quickly: her father's death, her forced removal from the only home she'd known, and now this strange new situation with a man she couldn't quite figure out. She lay back on the bed, intending only to rest for a moment, but exhaustion claimed her immediately. When she woke, the room was bathed in the golden light of sunset, and the distant sound of men's voices drifted through her open window. Rising quickly, Rebecca splashed water on her face and smoothed her rumpled dress as best she could. She had only the clothes she wore and one spare dress in her bag, a reminder of how little she possessed in this world. Feeling self-conscious but determined to face whatever awaited her, Rebecca made her way downstairs. Following the sound of conversation, she found the kitchen at the back of the house, warm and fragrant with the smell of cooking food. A short, stocky man with a bushy mustache stood at the stove, stirring something in a large pot. He turned as she entered, his weathered face breaking into a broad smile. "Ah, the señorita is awake," he exclaimed. "I am Manuel. My wife tells me you slept like the dead." Rebecca felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to sleep so long." "Nonsense," came Fairfield's voice from behind her. She turned to find him entering from outside, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms. "You needed the rest." He gestured to the table already set for a meal. "Please sit. Manuel's stew is worth staying awake for." Dinner was a surprisingly comfortable affair. Manuel ate with them, regaling Rebecca with stories of his youth in Mexico and his journey north. Fairfield spoke little, but watched her with what seemed like genuine concern, ensuring her plate and cup remained full. When the meal ended, Manuel excused himself to take a plate to the bunkhouse for Charlie, who was tending to a sick calf. Left alone with Fairfield, Rebecca felt tension return to her shoulders. "I should discuss your duties," he said, seeming to sense her discomfort. "As I mentioned, the house needs looking after, cleaning, laundry, that sort of thing. Manuel handles most of the cooking, but he'd welcome help." Rebecca nodded. "I can manage that. I kept house for my father since I was 12. The men take their meals in the bunkhouse, except on Sundays when we all eat together here," Fairfield continued. "I'd appreciate if you'd assist with Sunday dinner, otherwise your time is largely your own once your work is done." "And where do I fit in the hierarchy?" Rebecca asked carefully. "Am I to take orders from everyone?" Fairfield frowned. "You're not a servant, Miss Nichols. You're here to manage the household. The ranch hands have no authority over you whatsoever. If anyone treats you with disrespect, I want to know about it immediately." He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "I know this situation is unusual. I want to make it clear that while legally you're working off your father's debt, I consider you a free woman employed in my household. You'll receive wages $20 a month plus room and board." Rebecca's surprise must have shown on her face because Fairfield added, "I believe in paying fair wages for honest work. The money is yours to save or spend as you wish." "But the debt is between me and your late father," he interrupted gently. "You didn't borrow that money, and I won't have you living like an indentured servant. Work hard, do your job well, and you'll be compensated accordingly." Rebecca was speechless. In one conversation, Fairfield had transformed her situation from bonded servitude to legitimate employment. It seemed too good to be true, and yet the sincerity in his eyes made her want to believe him. "Thank you," she said finally. "That's more than fair." Fairfield nodded, seemingly relieved by her response. "Good, you'll start tomorrow if you feel up to it. Now I have some ledgers to review before bed. Please make yourself at home. The books in the front room are yours to read if you enjoy reading." "I do," Rebecca admitted. Very much, though we had few books at home. A smile touched his lips. Then we have that in common at least. Good night, Miss Nichols. Good night, Mr. Fairfield. As he left the kitchen, Rebecca remained at the table trying to process everything. The man was a puzzle, a Boston-born rancher with refined tastes who paid off a stranger's debt and then offered fair wages instead of servitude. She didn't trust sudden good fortune. Life had taught her that kindness often came with hidden costs. Yet something about Isaac Fairfield's straightforward manner made her want to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, her luck had finally changed. Rebecca's first weeks at Evergreen Ranch passed in a blur of new routines and faces. The work was demanding, but satisfying. The large house required constant attention, and she took pride in bringing order to rooms that had clearly suffered from neglect since the previous housekeeper's departure. To her surprise, she found herself enjoying the rhythm of ranch life, from the pre-dawn sounds of the men heading out to work to the peaceful evenings when the house settled into silence. Fairfield himself remained something of an enigma. He was unfailingly polite, even kind, but maintained a careful distance. He left the house before dawn most days and often returned after dark, taking his meals with the hands in the bunkhouse rather than alone with her in the main house. Rebecca wondered if he was avoiding her, and if so, why he had brought her here at all. She learned more about him from others than from the man himself. Manuel told her how Fairfield had come west after serving in the Union Army during the Civil War, starting with almost nothing and building Evergreen through sheer determination. Mrs. Alvarez, who came twice weekly to help with laundry, spoke of his generosity to her family when they had arrived penniless from Mexico 5 years earlier. Charlie, the weathered foreman who occasionally took meals at the main house, perhaps provided the most insight. "Boss is a fair man," he told Rebecca one evening as she served him coffee on the porch. "Pays better than most ranchers, won't ask a man to do something he wouldn't do himself. Saved my life once when a horse rolled on me in the east pasture. Carried me 5 miles back to the ranch with a broken leg of his own. He seems to inspire loyalty," Rebecca observed. Charlie nodded. "That he does, though he keeps to himself more than most. Folks in town think he's standoffish, but it's not that. He just, I dunno, seems like he's carrying something heavy inside." This matched Rebecca's own observations. Sometimes she would find Fairfield in the front room late at night, staring into the fire with a distant expression, a book open but unread in his lap. He never spoke of family beyond brief mentions of his mother in Boston, and there were no photographs or personal mementos displayed in the house. For a man who had created such a beautiful home, he seemed strangely detached from it. One morning, about 3 weeks after her arrival, Rebecca rose earlier than usual. The house was quiet as she made her way downstairs, intending to start bread dough before beginning her other tasks. To her surprise, she found Fairfield already seated at the kitchen table, a steaming cup of coffee before him, writing in a leather-bound journal. He looked up at her entrance, seeming momentarily flustered before regaining his composure. "Good morning, Miss Nichols. You're up early." "As are you," she replied, moving to the stove to build up the fire. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all." He closed the journal and set his pen aside. "I often write before the day begins. It helps organize my thoughts." Rebecca couldn't help her curiosity. "Are you writing a book?" A smile touched his lips. "Nothing so ambitious, just observations, ideas. My father kept journals all his life. It's a habit he passed to me." This was the first time he had mentioned his father, and Rebecca seized the opportunity to learn more about the man whose house she now maintained. "Your family is in Boston," Manuel said. "Do you visit them often?" Fairfield's expression clouded slightly. "My father passed away 10 years ago. My mother still lives in our family home, but I haven't been back east since I came west after the war. We correspond regularly." "And your sister?" "Mrs. Alvarez mentioned you have a sister." "Elizabeth?" He nodded. "She's married to a banker in Philadelphia, has 3 children I've never met." There was a hint of regret in his voice that made Rebecca wonder about the story behind his words. "It must be difficult, being so far from family," she said carefully. Fairfield took a sip of his coffee. "Distance isn't always measured in miles, Miss Nichols. Sometimes people can be sitting across the same table and still be worlds apart." The statement seemed weighted with personal meaning, but before Rebecca could respond, he rose from the table. "I should join the men. We're moving cattle to the north pasture today." As he reached the door, he paused. "Miss Nichols, I've been meaning to ask, are you in need of anything?" "Clothing, personal items. The general store in town has a reasonable selection, or I could order from the catalog." Rebecca felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment. She had been washing her 2 dresses in rotation, hoping no one had noticed her limited wardrobe. "I'm fine, thank you," she said stiffly, pride overriding practicality. Fairfield studied her for a moment. "Your first month's wages will be ready on Friday. Perhaps you might consider accompanying Mrs. Alvarez to town on Saturday? She usually goes in for supplies." The offer was made with such careful respect for her dignity that Rebecca felt her resistance softening. "That might be nice," she conceded. "Thank you." He nodded, seeming pleased, and left her to her bread-making. As she kneaded the dough, Rebecca found herself thinking about their brief conversation. It was the most personal exchange they had shared since her arrival, and it left her with more questions than answers about the quiet rancher who had inexplicably changed the course of her life. Saturday's trip to Willow Creek with Mrs. Alvarez proved more enjoyable than Rebecca had anticipated. The older woman was talkative and kind, pointing out landmarks and sharing town gossip as their wagon rolled along the dusty road. Rebecca found herself laughing for the first time since her father's death. The town itself brought mixed emotions. It was here that her father's debt had been transferred, here that she had expected to be sold into something far worse than her current situation. Yet the busy streets and storefronts also represented a freedom she had rarely experienced, having grown up isolated on their failing homestead. Mrs. Alvarez's first stop was the general store, where Rebecca carefully spent some of her wages on fabric for new dresses, a hairbrush, and a small bottle of rose-scented soap, a luxury she had never been able to afford. The proprietor's wife, a friendly woman named Mrs. Peterson, offered to help Rebecca select patterns for her dresses. "You're staying out at Fairfield's place, I hear," Mrs. Peterson commented as she showed Rebecca a catalog of the latest fashions. "Working as his housekeeper." Rebecca tensed, wondering how much the townspeople knew about the circumstances of her employment. "Yes, for about a month now." Mrs. Peterson nodded approvingly. "Mr. Fairfield's well-respected around here, though he doesn't socialize much, keeps to himself but always fair in his dealings." "You're fortunate to have found such a position." "Yes," Rebecca agreed cautiously. "He seems a good employer." "Handsome, too," Mrs. Peterson added with a knowing smile. "Half the unmarried women in the county have set their caps for him over the years, but he's never shown interest. Some folks think he left a sweetheart back east." Rebecca felt an unexpected twinge at this speculation, which she quickly dismissed as simple curiosity. "He doesn't speak much of his past." "Men rarely do," Mrs. Peterson laughed, "especially the ones with interesting stories to tell." Their shopping complete, Mrs. Alvarez suggested they stop at the small cafe for lunch before heading back to the ranch. As they were finishing their meal, the cafe door opened, and Rebecca looked up to see Isaac Fairfield himself entering, accompanied by a tall, distinguished-looking man in a suit. Fairfield spotted them immediately, a look of surprise crossing his features before he smiled and approached their table. "Mrs. Alvarez, Miss Nichols, I didn't realize you'd still be in town." "We are just finishing, Mr. Fairfield," Mrs. Alvarez replied. "All the shopping is done." "Excellent." He turned to his companion. "Judge, may I introduce Mrs. Alvarez, our cook's wife, and Miss Rebecca Nichols, who manages my household. Ladies, this is Judge William Hampton." The judge tipped his hat politely. "A pleasure, ladies." "I've heard Manuel's cooking praised all over the county, Mrs. Alvarez." He turned to Rebecca. "And Miss Nichols, Fairfield here was just telling me how efficiently you've organized his home. Quite a change from his bachelor chaos, I imagine." Rebecca smiled, surprised by the compliment. "Mr. Fairfield's home was hardly chaotic, Your Honor, but thank you. Join us for coffee, Judge." Mrs. Alvarez invited, but the men declined. "We have business to discuss," Fairfield explained. "But I'm glad I ran into you. Miss Nichols, if you wouldn't mind selecting a few books from the lending library before you return, I noticed you finished the last of mine." Rebecca was touched that he had noticed. She had indeed read through the books in his front room, carefully returning each to its exact place on the shelf. "I'd be happy to, thank you. Take your time," he added. "Charlie will be in town until 4 o'clock if you need a ride back to the ranch." After the men moved to a corner table, Mrs. Alvarez gave Rebecca a meaningful look. "The boss notices much," says Little, she observed with a small smile. "He has watched you reading every evening this week." Rebecca felt her cheeks warm. "He's simply being considerate." The older woman hummed noncommittally. "Judge Hampton is his closest friend here. They served in the war together, I think." After lunch, Mrs. Alvarez went to visit her daughter while Rebecca made her way to the small lending library attached to the schoolhouse. She selected several volumes, a collection of Shakespeare's sonnets, a novel by Charles Dickens, and a book about native plants of the Montana Territory. As she was leaving, she nearly collided with Fairfield, who was just coming up the steps. "Forgive me," he said, steadying her with a hand on her elbow. "I thought I might find you here. Is something wrong?" Rebecca asked, suddenly concerned. "Not at all. I've finished my business with the judge earlier than expected. I thought perhaps. That is, if you're not ready to return to the ranch, I wondered if you might like to see something." His uncharacteristic hesitancy piqued her curiosity. "What is it?" "It's easier to show you," he replied. "It's not far, we can walk." Intrigued, Rebecca nodded her agreement. They strolled down the main street, past the saloon and the blacksmith shop, until they reached a small building set back from the road. A freshly painted sign hung above the door, "Willow Creek Gazette." "The town's first newspaper," Fairfield explained, opening the door for her. "It began publishing last month. Judge Hampton and I helped finance it." Inside, Rebecca found a tidy office with a large printing press dominating the center of the room. A young man looked up from a desk covered in papers and type blocks. "Mr. Fairfield, good to see you, sir." "Hello, Thomas. I've brought someone I'd like you to meet. This is Miss Rebecca Nichols." Miss Nichols, Thomas Ellis, editor and publisher of the Gazette. The young man wiped ink from his hands before offering one to Rebecca. "A pleasure, Miss Nichols. Any friend of Mr. Fairfield's is welcome here." Thomas was a reporter in Chicago before coming west, Fairfield explained. "He's determined to bring literacy and information to our corner of the territory." "It's a worthy goal," Rebecca said sincerely. Thomas beamed. "Would you like to see how the press works, Miss Nichols? We're printing tomorrow's edition now." For the next half hour, Rebecca watched in fascination as Thomas demonstrated the printing process, explaining how he set type and created the newspaper. She had never seen a printing press in operation before, and the intricate mechanics captivated her. "Miss Nichols has quite a literary appetite," Fairfield told Thomas. "She's read through most of my library already." "Is that so?" Thomas looked at Rebecca with newfound interest. "I'm always looking for contributors, Miss Nichols. Perhaps you might consider writing something for the Gazette." "A column about ranch life or book reviews?" Rebecca was startled by the suggestion. "Oh, I couldn't possibly, why not?" Fairfield interrupted gently. "You write beautifully. I've seen your hand in the household ledger." She looked at him in surprise. "Keeping accounts is hardly the same as writing for publication." "Think about it," Thomas encouraged. "We need more female perspectives in these pages." As they left the newspaper office, Rebecca was still processing the unexpected suggestion. "Did you bring me there to put me on the spot, Mr. Fairfield?" she asked. Though there was no real accusation in her tone, he chuckled. "Not at all. I simply thought you might enjoy seeing the press." Thomas's suggestion was his own, though I think it has merit. They walked in companionable silence for a moment before Rebecca spoke again. Thank you for showing me. It was fascinating. I'm glad you enjoyed it. He hesitated, then added, I've been concerned that you might find ranch life isolating. Your father's homestead was remote, but at least it was the home you knew. Evergreen must seem very foreign to you. The thoughtfulness of his concern touched her. It was strange at first, she admitted, but less so with each passing day. Everyone has been kind, good. He looked genuinely relieved. I want you to be comfortable there, Miss Nichols, to feel that it's your home, at least for now. As they approached the wagon where Mrs. Alvarez waited, Rebecca found herself wondering what it would be like to truly belong at Evergreen, not as an employee working off a debt, but as someone with a rightful place there. The thought was both comforting and unsettling, for reasons she wasn't quite ready to examine. Summer stretched into early autumn, bringing cooler nights and subtle changes to the landscape around Evergreen Ranch. Rebecca settled deeper into her role, finding satisfaction in her work and growing more comfortable with the ranch's rhythms. The house had transformed under her care, becoming truly welcoming in a way that seemed to surprise and please Fairfield. Their interactions remained cordial but increasingly warm. Fairfield now took breakfast and dinner at the main house most days, and their conversations over meals had become one of Rebecca's favorite parts of her routine. He was well-read and thoughtful, able to discuss everything from cattle breeding to international politics with equal insight. Rebecca had taken Thomas Ellis up on his offer and begun writing a monthly column for the Gazette about rural life and literature. To her surprise, it had been well received, with several townspeople commenting positively when she accompanied Mrs. Alvarez on their Saturday trips. One crisp October evening, Rebecca sat on the front porch, wrapped in a shawl against the growing chill, working on her next column. The sun was setting in a spectacular display of orange and purple when Fairfield returned from checking the herd with Charlie. He dismounted, handed his horse to one of the hands, and approached the porch. You'll catch cold out here, he observed, though his tone was light. Rebecca smiled. The light was too beautiful to waste indoors. Besides, I think better outside. Working on your column? He climbed the steps and settled into the chair beside hers, his tall frame relaxing with a sigh that spoke of a long day's physical labor. Yes, Thomas wants it by Saturday. May I ask the topic? The changing seasons, she replied. How autumn brings both promise and melancholy. Fairfield nodded, looking out at the sunset. There's truth in that. The harvest brings fulfillment of spring's promise, but winter's approach carries its own anxieties. Exactly, Rebecca said, pleased by his understanding. Though I've always found autumn more hopeful than sad, even as things die back, they're preparing for renewal. He glanced at her, a smile touching his lips. You have a poet's soul, Miss Nichols. Hardly, she laughed. Just a homesteader's daughter who spent too much time watching the seasons change while waiting for rain. His expression sobered. I never asked. Was your mother also a homesteader's daughter? The question surprised her. Fairfield rarely inquired about her past. No, Rebecca answered after a moment. She was a schoolteacher from Minnesota. She came west to teach in Helena and met my father there. They married and started the homestead together. She must have been an educated woman. She was. Rebecca felt the familiar pang that always accompanied memories of her mother. She taught me at home until she died when I was 12. After that, there were only the books she'd left behind. I'm sorry, Fairfield said quietly. It couldn't have been easy losing her so young. It wasn't. My father changed after she was gone. He'd always enjoyed cards and whiskey, but they became his refuge, and then his obsession. Fairfield was silent for a moment. I've never asked about the circumstances of your father's debt. I didn't think it my place. Rebecca stared at the last sliver of sun disappearing behind the mountains. It accumulated over years. Bad harvests, bad luck at cards. The drought 3 years ago was the final blow. He mortgaged the homestead to Garfield, then lost that money too. When Garfield threatened to take the land, Father offered me as collateral for a new loan. She hadn't spoken of it aloud before, and the words felt bitter on her tongue. Beside her, Fairfield had gone very still. I didn't know until after he died, she continued softly. He never told me he'd signed such an agreement. I think he truly believed his luck would change, that he'd win enough to pay it all back before I ever had to know. No man with an ounce of decency would accept such terms, Fairfield said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. Garfield isn't known for his decency, Rebecca replied, and desperate men make desperate choices. They sat in silence as darkness settled over the ranch. Finally, Fairfield spoke again, his voice gentler. You must despise him for what he did. Rebecca considered this. I was furious at first. Heartbroken, but now, I mostly feel pity. He was a weak man who lost everything that mattered to him, first my mother, then his self-respect, finally his land. By the end, I think he hated himself more than I ever could. Fairfield turned to look at her, his expression difficult to read in the gathering darkness. You have a generous heart, Miss Nichols. Not particularly, she demurred. Just a practical one. Hatred requires too much energy to maintain. He chuckled softly at that, a wise perspective. Inside the house, a lamp was lit, casting a warm glow through the window. Rebecca gathered her papers. I should finish this inside and help Manuel with dinner. Of course. Fairfield stood and opened the door for her. As she passed him, he added, Miss Nichols. Thank you for sharing your story with me. The sincerity in his voice warmed her more than she cared to admit. Thank you for listening, Mr. Fairfield. That night marked a subtle shift in their relationship. The careful distance Fairfield had maintained began to dissolve, replaced by a growing ease between them. He started joining Rebecca in the front room in the evenings, sometimes reading silently in the chair opposite hers, other times engaging her in conversations that ranged far beyond the practicalities of ranch business. Rebecca learned that he had studied at Harvard before the war, that he had a passion for maps and exploration accounts, and that despite his success as a rancher, he sometimes missed the intellectual stimulation of city life. In turn, she shared more of herself, her dreams of seeing the world beyond Montana territory, her love of poetry, her memories of happier times with her parents. As autumn deepened toward winter, the ranch prepared for the coming cold. Hay was stacked in the barn, supplies laid in, and the house made ready for the long months ahead. Rebecca found herself surprisingly content with the prospect of a winter at Evergreen. The isolation that might once have troubled her now felt like a cocoon, a safe space in which to heal from the wounds of her past. The first heavy snow came in late November, transforming the landscape overnight into a pristine white expanse. Rebecca woke to find the world outside her window altered, familiar shapes made new by their covering of snow. She dressed quickly and went downstairs to find Fairfield already in the kitchen, stoking the fire to a roaring blaze. Good morning, he greeted her. First real snow of the season. The men are breaking ice on the troughs and checking the herd. Manuel's gone to help. Should I prepare breakfast for everyone? Rebecca asked, reaching for her apron. No need. They ate early. He hesitated, then added, I thought perhaps, if you're not opposed to the cold, you might like to see something. His mysterious invitation reminded her of their trip to the newspaper office, and Rebecca nodded, curiosity piqued. I don't mind the cold if I'm dressed for it. 20 minutes later, bundled in her warmest clothes and a heavy coat Fairfield had insisted she borrow, Rebecca followed him outside. The snow crunched beneath their boots as they walked past the barn and outbuildings toward a rise behind the house. The climb was not difficult, but Rebecca was breathing hard by the time they reached the top, her breath forming clouds in the crisp air. Look, Fairfield said simply, gesturing outward. Rebecca gasped softly. From this vantage point, she could see the entire ranch spread below them, the buildings nestled in their protective circle of trees, the pastures beyond, and the mountains rising majestically in the distance. The morning sun glinted off the snow, creating a dazzling panorama that stretched to the horizon. "It's magnificent," she breathed. Fairfield nodded, his eyes on the vista before them. "I come here often, in every season at different times of day. It never looks the same twice, yet it's always home." There was such quiet conviction in his voice that Rebecca turned to study him. His profile was strong against the bright sky, his expression reflective as he surveyed his domain. In that moment, she saw not just the competent rancher or the educated Easterner, but a man who had found his place in the world, who had built it with his own hands. "You love it here," she observed. "I do." He met her gaze, his eyes as clear as the winter sky. "When I first came west, I was lost. The war had changed me. Boston felt foreign, suffocating. I came seeking something I couldn't name and found it here." "Peace," Rebecca suggested softly. A smile touched his lips. "Yes, and purpose. A chance to build something lasting." They stood in companionable silence, watching the sun climb higher. Rebecca was acutely aware of his presence beside her, solid, reassuring, increasingly familiar. "When you first brought me here," she said carefully, "I thought my life was over. That I'd traded one prison for another, just with a kinder jailer." Fairfield winced slightly at her phrasing but remained silent, waiting for her to continue. "I was wrong," Rebecca admitted. "You've given me more freedom here than I ever had with my father, more opportunity to be myself." "I'm glad," he said simply. "That's all I wanted for you." The sincerity in his voice stirred something in Rebecca's heart, a warmth that had been growing steadily over the past months, but which she had been careful not to examine too closely. Standing beside him on the snowy hilltop, she could no longer deny that her feelings for Isaac Fairfield had evolved far beyond gratitude or respect. The realization should have frightened her. He was, after all, the man who had purchased her father's debt, who technically held her future in his hands. Yet fear was the furthest thing from her mind as they made their way back down the hill, their shoulders occasionally brushing through their heavy coats. Winter settled over Evergreen Ranch, bringing shorter days and long, quiet evenings. The ranch hands kept busy with indoor tasks and caring for the livestock, while Rebecca maintained the house and assisted Manuel with more elaborate meals than the summer months had allowed time for. Fairfield split his time between working with the men and attending to the business side of ranching, keeping ledgers, corresponding with cattle buyers, and planning for the spring. Their evening routine solidified into something Rebecca came to cherish. After dinner, they would retire to the front room, where Fairfield would build up the fire while Rebecca lit the lamps. Sometimes they read in comfortable silence. Other times they talked late into the night, sharing stories and ideas as equals rather than employer and employee. December brought preparations for Christmas, the first Rebecca would celebrate without her father. To her surprise, Fairfield embraced the holiday with enthusiasm, instructing the men to bring in a large pine tree for the front room and unpacking ornaments his mother had sent from Boston years before. "Christmas was always important in my family," he explained as they decorated the tree one evening. "My mother insisted on maintaining traditions, even during the war years when everything else seemed to be falling apart." Rebecca handed him a delicate glass star. "What traditions?" "The tree, of course, carols around the piano, a feast with all the traditional dishes, and gifts exchanged on Christmas morning." He carefully placed the star near the top of the tree. "What about your family? How did you celebrate?" Rebecca threaded popcorn onto a string, considering her answer. "Simply, we couldn't afford much, but Mother always made sure there was special food and at least one small gift. After she died, Father and I, well, we acknowledged the day, but it wasn't the same." Fairfield's expression softened with understanding. "Perhaps we can create new traditions this year. The Hands and their families will join us for dinner on Christmas Day. It's an evergreen custom. Manuel outshines himself every year." "That sounds lovely," Rebecca said sincerely. The prospect of a house full of people celebrating together appealed to her far more. than she would have expected a few months earlier. 2 days before Christmas, Rebecca accompanied Mrs. Alvarez to town for last-minute supplies and to deliver her latest column to Thomas. The streets of Willow Creek were festive, with greenery decorating storefronts and children playing in the snow. After completing their errands, the women stopped at the general store, where Rebecca hoped to find small gifts for Manuel and Mrs. Alvarez. As she browsed, the bell above the door jingled, and she glanced up to see Judge Hampton entering with a striking woman on his arm. The woman was elegantly dressed in a fashion that seemed more appropriate for San Francisco than Willow Creek, her blonde hair arranged in an elaborate style beneath a fur-trimmed hat. Mrs. Peterson hurried forward to greet them. "Judge Hampton and Miss Howard, what a pleasure to see you both." "Good day, Mrs. Peterson," the judge replied jovially. "Miss Howard required a few items before our journey to Helena tomorrow." The woman Miss Howard smiled with practiced charm. "Just some gloves and ribbons if you have them." As Mrs. Peterson led them to a display case, the judge spotted Rebecca. "Ah, Miss Nichols, a pleasure to see you again. How are things at Evergreen?" "Very well, thank you, Judge Hampton," Rebecca replied politely. The judge turned to his companion. "Louisa, may I present Miss Rebecca Nichols? She manages Isaac Fairfield's household. Miss Nichols, this is Miss Louisa Howard from Helena." Miss Howard appraised Rebecca with curious eyes. "How do you do? You work for Isaac? How interesting. I've known him for several years through my father's banking connections." "It's nice to meet you, Miss Howard," Rebecca said, immediately conscious of her practical dress and unadorned appearance beside the other woman's sophistication. "Isaac is well, I trust," Miss Howard continued. "We were disappointed he declined our invitation to spend Christmas in Helena. Father so enjoys his company, and of course, I had hoped to introduce him to several of my friends." Her tone carried a hint of possessiveness that Rebecca found instantly irritating. "Mr. Fairfield is quite well," she replied evenly. "He's preparing for our Christmas celebration at the ranch." "How quaint," Miss Howard said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Well, do give him my regards when you return. Tell him Louisa said he's missed at our gatherings." After the judge and Miss Howard moved to another part of the store, Mrs. Alvarez appeared at Rebecca's side. "That one has been chasing Mr. Fairfield for 2 years," she whispered. "Her father owns the biggest bank in Helena, very rich, very determined." Rebecca tried to ignore the unpleasant sensation in her stomach. "Mr. Fairfield's personal relationships are none of my concern," she said stiffly. Mrs. Alvarez gave her a knowing look, but said nothing more. On the ride back to the ranch, Rebecca found herself uncharacteristically quiet, her thoughts troubled by the encounter with Louisa Howard. The woman was beautiful, wealthy, and clearly interested in Fairfield. She represented the world he had come from, educated, refined, connected to the highest social circles in the territory. Beside her, Rebecca felt painfully aware of her own limitations, a homesteader's daughter with little education beyond what her mother had provided, and what she'd taught herself from books. The foolishness of her growing feelings for Fairfield struck her forcefully. Whatever warmth had developed between them, whatever friendship they had formed, she could never be his equal in the ways that mattered to society. He had saved her from a terrible fate, had treated her with kindness and respect, but that did not mean he saw her as anything more than a responsibility he had assumed. By the time they reached Evergreen, Rebecca had composed herself, pushing her troubled thoughts behind a calm facade. As she helped unload their purchases, Fairfield emerged from the barn, his face lighting with a smile at their return. "Successful trip?" he asked, taking a heavy sack of flour from her arms. "Very," she replied, careful to keep her tone light. "The town is quite festive." "We saw Judge Hampton," Mrs. Alvarez added, giving Rebecca a sidelong glance. "And Miss Howard from Helena." Fairfield's expression flickered briefly. "Ah, they mentioned they might be in town. The judge is escorting her to Helena for the holidays." "Miss Howard asked after you," Rebecca said, watching his face. "She seemed disappointed you declined their invitation." He shrugged, seeming unconcerned. The Howards hold a large gathering every Christmas, very formal, very political, not really to my taste. Miss Howard is very beautiful, Rebecca observed, immediately regretting the comment as both Fairfield and Mrs. Alvarez looked at her with surprise. She is considered so, yes, Fairfield replied carefully. Beauty takes many forms, however. Before Rebecca could decipher his meaning, Charlie called from the corral, requiring Fairfield's attention. He excused himself, leaving Rebecca with the distinct feeling that she had somehow revealed more than she had intended. Christmas Eve arrived with clear skies and bitter cold. The hands who had families in town had departed for their celebrations, leaving only Charlie, Manuel and Mrs. Alvarez, Fairfield, and Rebecca at the ranch. After a simple but delicious dinner prepared by Manuel, they gathered in the front room, where the decorated tree glowed with candles and the fire roared in the hearth. Manuel had brought his guitar, and to Rebecca's delight, he played Christmas carols while the others sang. Even Charlie, normally so taciturn, joined in with a surprisingly pleasant baritone. Mrs. Alvarez served hot cider spiced with cinnamon, and for a time the room was filled with warmth and genuine camaraderie. As the evening wore on, Manuel and Mrs. Alvarez excused themselves to prepare for midnight mass in town, where Charlie would drive them in the wagon. Rebecca moved to help Mrs. Alvarez with the cups, but Fairfield stopped her with a gentle hand on her arm. "Stay a moment," he said. "I have something for you." When they were alone, he went to his desk and retrieved a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with a red ribbon. "I know gifts are traditionally exchanged tomorrow morning, but I wanted to give you this privately." Surprised and touched, Rebecca accepted the package. "I have something for you as well," she admitted, going to the small secretary desk where she kept her writing materials. From the drawer, she withdrew a carefully wrapped parcel. They sat before the fire, each holding the other's gift. "You first," Fairfield insisted. Rebecca carefully untied the ribbon and unwrapped the paper to reveal a small leather-bound book. Opening it, she gasped softly. It was a collection of Emily Dickinson's poems, not a widely available volume, but a special edition published in limited numbers. "How did you?" she began, running her fingers reverently over the embossed cover. "I wrote to a bookseller in Boston," Fairfield explained. "You mentioned once that you had read a few of her poems in a magazine and admired them. I thought you might enjoy having her collected works." The thoughtfulness of the gift nearly brought tears to Rebecca's eyes. That he had remembered such a casual comment had gone to such trouble. "It's perfect," she said softly. "Thank you." "Now yours," he prompted, beginning to unwrap her gift. Inside, he found a hand-knitted scarf in deep blue wool, along with a small bound notebook filled with handwritten pages. "The scarf is practical," Rebecca explained, suddenly nervous. "The winters here are so cold, but the notebook. It's a collection of passages I've copied from books over the years. Things that moved me or made me think. I thought you might enjoy them, since we seem to share similar literary tastes." Fairfield opened the notebook, reading a few lines on the first page, a passage from Shakespeare that Rebecca had always found particularly meaningful. His expression as he looked up at her was one of genuine wonder. "This is the most thoughtful gift I've ever received," he said quietly. "To share the words that have shaped your thoughts, there could be no more personal present." Rebecca felt her cheeks warm at his praise. "I'm glad you like it." "I shall treasure it," he assured her, carefully setting the gifts aside. "Rebecca." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent a flutter through her chest. "Yes," she prompted when he hesitated. Fairfield seemed to be struggling with something, his usual composure momentarily absent. "I've been wanting to speak with you about something important, about our arrangement." Rebecca's heart sank. Had he tired of her presence in his home? Was he planning to send her away? Perhaps Louisa Howard's appearance had reminded him of the disparity between Rebecca and the kind of woman society expected him to associate with. "What about our arrangement?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's been 6 months since you came to Evergreen," he began. "In that time, you've transformed this house into a true home. Your presence has brought life to rooms that were merely functional before. The men comment on it, visitors notice it, and he paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "I've come to depend on it, on you." Rebecca wasn't sure how to respond. This didn't sound like dismissal, yet his serious tone concerned her. "The truth is," he continued, "the debt that brought you here was satisfied long ago by any reasonable measure. Your work has been exemplary, worth far more than what your father owed. You've fulfilled any obligation many times over." "Are you saying you want me to leave?" Rebecca asked directly, needing clarity. "No." The vehemence of his response startled them both. More quietly, he added, "No, that's not what I'm saying at all. I'm trying to tell you that you're free, Rebecca. You have been for some time. If you choose to stay at Evergreen, it should be because you want to, not because you feel bound by your father's debt." Relief flooded through her, followed quickly by confusion. "I don't understand. If the debt is settled, why have you continued to pay me wages?" "Because you earned them," he said simply. "Your work has value regardless of the circumstances that brought you here. I never wanted you to feel like an indentured servant." Rebecca considered his words carefully. "If I'm free to leave, then I'm also free to stay as your housekeeper." "Yes, of course." A shadow passed over his features. "Though I had hoped, that is, I wondered if you might consider staying in another capacity." Her heart began to race. "What capacity would that be?" Fairfield stood abruptly, moving to the fireplace and staring into the flames. "Forgive me. This is neither the time nor the way I intended to speak of this." Rebecca rose as well, drawn to his side by the tension in his bearing. "Please, tell me what you're thinking." He turned to face her, his expression more vulnerable than she had ever seen it. "I'm thinking that I brought you here to save you from a terrible fate, but in doing so, I may have denied you the chance to make your own choices, to decide your own future." "You've given me more choices than I ever had before," she countered gently. "Have I?" His blue eyes searched hers. "Or have I simply replaced one form of obligation with another?" Understanding dawned on Rebecca. "You're worried that my gratitude might influence my feelings toward you." He looked away. "It would be natural if it did. I've seen it before, people mistaking gratitude for deeper emotions." "Is that what you think I've done?" she asked quietly. Fairfield ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of uncertainty. "I don't know what you feel, Rebecca. I only know that I want you to be truly free to choose your path without any sense of debt or obligation clouding your judgment." "And if my choice is to stay at Evergreen," she pressed, taking a step closer to him. "If my feelings have nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with the man you are," his gaze snapped back to hers, hope and caution warring in his expression. "What are you saying?" Rebecca summoned her courage. "I'm saying that I've come to care for you, Isaac, not because you saved me from Roland Wells or gave me a home or treated me with respect, though I am grateful for all those things. I care for you because of the way you build up the people around you. Because of your quiet integrity and your gentle heart, because conversations with you are the best part of my day." She took another step toward him, close enough now to see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes. "And I'm saying that if you feel something for me beyond the obligation of an employer or the concern of a friend, I would very much like to know it." For a long moment, Isaac didn't speak, and Rebecca feared she had misread everything. Then, slowly, he reached out to take her hands in his. "I felt something for you almost from the beginning," he admitted, his voice low and earnest. "At first, I told myself it was inappropriate that you were under my protection, that I had no right to think of you as anything but someone in my care. I kept my distance, tried to focus only on ensuring your comfort and safety." His thumbs traced gentle circles on the backs of her hands. "But as the weeks passed, as I came to know you better, I found myself looking forward to every conversation, every shared meal, every moment in your company. Your strength amazed me, your intelligence challenged me, your kindness humbled me." Rebecca's heart soared at his words, but he wasn't finished. When I realized I was falling in love with you, I was terrified, Isaac continued. Terrified that you could never return those feelings genuinely, that any affection you showed might be rooted in your situation rather than true choice. I couldn't bear the thought of you feeling obligated to care for me. Love. Rebecca whispered, seizing on the word that had made her pulse quicken. Isaac's expression softened. Yes, Rebecca, I love you. I've loved you for months now, though I've been afraid to speak of it. She released his hands only to reach up and touch his face, her fingers gentle against his beard. Then we've both been fools. Because I love you too, Isaac Fairfield, and have done for longer than I've been willing to admit, even to myself. The joy that transformed his features was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Isaac lowered his head until his lips met hers in a kiss that began tentatively, but quickly deepened into something that made Rebecca's knees weak and her heart race. When they finally parted, both breathless, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. I had a whole speech prepared, he murmured. I was going to wait until spring when you'd had more time to be certain of your feelings. Rebecca smiled, her hands resting on his chest where she could feel his heart beating as rapidly as her own. I don't need more time. I know my own mind, Isaac. And my own heart. He kissed her again, briefly but tenderly. Then may I ask the question I've been carrying for weeks now? Please do, she encouraged. Isaac took a small step back, still holding her hands in his. Rebecca Nichols, I love you more than I ever thought possible. You've brought light and warmth back into my life, made Evergreen truly feel like home for the first time. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Tears of happiness sprang to Rebecca's eyes. Yes, she said without hesitation. Yes, I will marry you, Isaac. His smile was radiant as he pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in his exuberance. When he set her down, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. I've been carrying this for weeks, he admitted sheepishly, waiting for the right moment. Inside the box was a ring of delicate gold filigree set with a perfect oval sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds. It was my grandmother's, Isaac explained. My mother sent it when I wrote to her about you. You wrote to your mother about me? Rebecca asked, surprised. Of course. I told her I'd met the most extraordinary woman, intelligent, compassionate, strong, and that I hoped someday to make her my wife. He slipped the ring onto her finger, where it fit as if made for her. She wrote back immediately, sending this ring and insisting on meeting you as soon as possible. Rebecca admired the ring, then looked up at him with sudden concern. What will people say? The town, your friends, they'll think you married your housekeeper, a woman who came to you through her father's debt. Isaac's expression grew serious. Let them say what they will. Those who matter know the truth that I'm the fortunate one to have found such a remarkable woman to share my life. As for the rest, we know how we came to love each other, and that's all that matters. The sound of the wagon returning interrupted them. Isaac pressed one more kiss to Rebecca's lips before stepping back, though he kept hold of her hand. Shall we share our news? He asked, his eyes bright with happiness. Rebecca nodded, suddenly eager to tell Mrs. Alvarez, who had seemed to know where their hearts were heading before they did themselves. Yes, and tomorrow we can tell the others at Christmas dinner. As Manuel, Mrs. Alvarez and Charlie entered, stamping snow from their boots and bringing the crisp night air with them, Rebecca felt a sense of completeness she had never known before. The path that had brought her to Evergreen had been marked by loss and hardship, yet it had led her to this moment surrounded by good people, her hand in Isaac's, her future stretching before her bright with promise. Spring came early to Montana Territory in 1879, bringing with it new life and new beginnings. The April day dawned clear and mild, perfect for a wedding at Evergreen Ranch. Rebecca stood at her bedroom window, watching as wagons arrived carrying guests from town and neighboring ranches. The past months had been a whirlwind of preparation and happiness as she and Isaac planned their future together. True to his word, Isaac had insisted on a proper courtship despite their engagement, treating Rebecca with a formal respect that amused the ranch hands and delighted Mrs. Alvarez. They had traveled to Helena in February to meet Isaac's old friend Judge Hampton properly, and the judge had immediately offered to perform their wedding ceremony when the time came. Word of their engagement had spread quickly through Willow Creek. To Rebecca's surprise, the news had been met with general approval. It seemed Isaac's standing in the community was such that his choice of bride was accepted without question, and Rebecca's columns in the Gazette had earned her own measure of respect among the townspeople. There had been one notable exception. Louisa Howard had paid an unexpected visit to Evergreen in March, ostensibly to deliver a message from her father, but clearly hoping to confirm the rumors she had heard. Her barely concealed displeasure upon seeing Rebecca wearing Isaac's grandmother's ring had been the only sour note in an otherwise joyful time. A knock at the door interrupted Rebecca's reflections. "Come in," she called, turning from the window. Mrs. Alvarez entered, carrying a large box. "It is time to dress, Nina. Your husband-to-be is pacing downstairs like a caged mountain lion." Rebecca laughed. "Is he nervous, anxious to see his bride?" the older woman corrected with a warm smile. "Now let me help you with this." From the box, Mrs. Alvarez withdrew a wedding dress of cream-colored silk, trimmed with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. It was the most beautiful garment Rebecca had ever owned, ordered from a dressmaker in Helena based on a design from Mrs. Fairfield's suggestions in her letters. Isaac's mother had been unable to travel from Boston for the wedding, her health not permitting such a journey, but her frequent letters had made Rebecca feel as if she knew the woman already. Mrs. Fairfield had embraced her son's choice wholeheartedly, writing that she looked forward to meeting her new daughter when Rebecca and Isaac visited Boston in the fall. With Mrs. Alvarez's help, Rebecca dressed for her wedding. Her hair was arranged in an elegant upswept style, adorned with small white flowers from the greenhouse Isaac had built for her as an engagement present. The sapphire ring glinted on her finger, and around her neck hung a simple gold locket that had been her mother's something old. "You are beautiful," Mrs. Alvarez declared when they had finished, "like a princess in a story." Rebecca hugged the woman who had become like a mother to her over the past months. "Thank you for everything, Maria. Your friendship has meant so much to me." Mrs. Alvarez patted her cheek affectionately. "You have brought happiness back to this house and to the man who built it. That is a precious gift." She stepped back, her eyes suspiciously bright. "Now it is time. Judge Hampton is waiting, and so is your Isaac." Rebecca took a deep breath and followed Mrs. Alvarez downstairs. The ceremony would take place in the front yard, beneath an arch of early spring flowers that Charlie and the Hands had constructed. As she reached the bottom of the stairs, she found Thomas Ellis waiting to escort her. "You look radiant," he told her with a brotherly smile. Thomas had become a good friend to both Rebecca and Isaac, publishing not only her column but also occasional articles by Isaac on ranching innovations. "Ready to become Mrs. Fairfield?" "More than ready," Rebecca assured him. Music began outside a violin played by one of the ranch hands who had once performed in theaters back east. Thomas offered his arm, and Rebecca placed her hand upon it, her heart beating faster as they moved toward the front door. The spring sunshine greeted them as they stepped onto the porch. Rebecca paused for a moment, taking in the scene before her. Rows of chairs had been set up on the lawn, filled with people from town and neighboring ranches. At the far end stood the flower-covered arch, and beneath it, Judge Hampton in his formal attire. And there was Isaac, tall and handsome in a new suit, his face lighting with wonder as he saw her. In his eyes, Rebecca saw everything she had ever hoped for: love, respect, partnership, and the promise of a future built together. As Thomas led her down the aisle created between the chairs, Rebecca reflected on the journey that had brought her here. A year ago, she had stood in her father's cabin, believing her life was over. Now she walked toward a man who had not only saved her from a terrible fate, but had shown her that she was worthy of love and capable of giving it in return. When she reached Isaac's side, he took her hand in his touch steadying her as it always did. "You are breathtaking," he whispered as Judge Hampton began the ceremony. Their vows were simple and heartfelt, spoken clearly for all to hear. When Isaac slipped a gold band onto her finger to join her engagement ring, his hands trembled slightly, and Rebecca felt her own eyes fill with tears of joy. "By the authority vested in me," Judge Hampton pronounced finally, "I now declare you husband and wife. Isaac, you may kiss your bride." Isaac's kiss was gentle but filled with promise, and the assembled guests broke into applause and cheers. As they turned to face their friends and neighbors as Mr. and Mrs. Fairfield, Rebecca felt a sense of rightness that went bone deep. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening. Tables had been set up in the yard, laden with food prepared by Manuel and several women from town. There was music and dancing, laughter and toasts to the newlyweds' happiness. Isaac rarely left Rebecca's side, his pride in his new wife evident in every glance, every touch. As sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, the couple found a quiet moment together on the porch, watching their guests enjoy the festivities. "Are you happy, Mrs. Fairfield?" Isaac asked, his arm around her waist. Rebecca leaned into his embrace, savoring the sound of her new name. "Completely, and you, more than I ever imagined possible." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "I keep thinking about how we met, the circumstances that brought you here. Something so wrong leading to something so right. Perhaps it wasn't chance," Rebecca suggested. "Perhaps we were always meant to find each other, and that was simply the path that brought us together." Isaac considered this. "I like that thought. That no matter what happened, we would have found our way to each other eventually." "I believe we would have," she said with conviction. "Some things are simply meant to be." As darkness fell and lanterns were lit around the yard, illuminating the continuing celebration, Isaac took Rebecca's hand. "Come with me, I have something to show you." He led her away from the party, toward the rise behind the house where he had taken her that snowy morning months ago. A lantern had been placed at the top, casting a warm glow over a surprising sight: a small cabin, newly built, its windows glowing with lamplight. "What is this?" Rebecca asked, intrigued. "Our own private retreat," Isaac explained. "Somewhere we can escape when the main house is full of hands or visitors. Somewhere that's just for us." He opened the door to reveal a cozy interior with a stone fireplace, a comfortable-looking bed, a small table and chairs, and bookshelves already partially filled with volumes. A fire burned in the hearth and fresh flowers stood in a vase on the table. "It's perfect," Rebecca breathed, taking in every detail. "When did you do this?" "The men and I have been working on it for months, whenever you were in town or otherwise occupied." Isaac looked pleased by her reaction. "I thought we might spend our wedding night here, away from the main house, and perhaps some quiet evenings in the future when we want solitude." Rebecca turned to him, filled with love for this thoughtful man who continually surprised her with his care. "I can think of nothing more wonderful." Isaac drew her into his arms, his kiss deeper and more passionate now that they were alone. When they parted, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Rebecca Fairfield, with everything I am. And I love you, Isaac, today, tomorrow, always." Later, as they lay together in the cabin's comfortable bed, the sounds of the wedding celebration a distant murmur, Rebecca gazed at her husband's face in the firelight. Once, she had feared becoming someone's property, a life condemned to servitude or worse. Instead, she had found partnership, respect, and a love that grew stronger with each passing day. Isaac's eyes opened, meeting hers with a tenderness that made her heart swell. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his voice husky with emotion. "I'm thinking about debts," she replied honestly. "About how my father's debt brought me to you, and how that debt has been transformed into something beautiful." He traced the curve of her cheek with gentle fingers. "The only debt between us now is the one we both share, to love and honor each other for all our days." That, Rebecca agreed, leaning in to kiss him, "is a debt I will gladly spend a lifetime repaying." Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, watching over Evergreen Ranch and the couple who had found in each other not a master and servant, not a savior and victim, but true equals bound by love's most sacred promise. And as spring blossomed around them, so too did their life together, a life built not on obligation, but on choice, respect, and the enduring power of love freely given and joyfully received.